Donald Trump has dominated headlines and media coverage since he announced his U.S. presidential candidacy last June. Out of an original field of 17 Republican candidates, he's the last one standing, making him the presumptive nominee for the party. The coverage of his campaign has led some critics to accuse the media of creating the Trump phenomenon. But as CCTV's Jim Spellman reports, it's not that simple.
We're a little nervous.
The race for U.S. president began with about 20 candidates. But the American media has given far more attention to Donald Trump than any of the others. Media analytics company MediaQuant tracks mentions of candidates on TV, in print, and online. They then use advertising rates to calculate how much all that coverage would be worth if campaigns were paying for it as advertising. Trump blows away the rest of the field with nearly $3 billion worth of coverage over the last year, followed by Hillary Clinton at $1.1 billion and Ted Cruz at almost $800 million.
I won.
Trump leveraged this coverage masterfully, using it to help knock out his opponents and become the presumptive Republican nominee for president.
The numbers we're seeing for Trump are 4 times the 2008 numbers and double what Romney and Obama were generating back in 2012.
You know, I've never done it. For 7 months I've been a politician.
So has the U.S. media given Trump a free ride? Well, it's not that simple. Much of the coverage has been negative. Trump has marveled at how his critics have struggled to land a blow.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Controversial comments have been widely covered, misstatements have been fact-checked, even his flirtations with conspiracy theories have all been reported on. But many Republican primary voters have consistently supported him.
The old adage that any coverage is good coverage, and to a certain extent it does play out pretty well here. And it's very subjective. Some people might refer to Trump as a narcissist in the media, but some of his backers would actually consider that a key attribute of a leader in a political role like President of the United States.
In the political trade, the kind of coverage Trump gets is called earned media, and Trump certainly works hard earning it. Trump is a presence on social media. When other candidates refuse to give interviews or hold news conferences, Trump makes himself available while using the skills he has honed over years in the public eye.
You're all fired.
I think the reality television experience has given him the ability to not only understand what motivates people emotionally, what rings their bell, he also has picked up the acting chops to, sort of telegraph himself as a true believer.
And Trump plays into a U.S. media that needs the ratings, readers, and revenue just as much as Trump needs them.
A for-profit media environment is driven by ratings, driven by ad impressions, driven by the economics that they face in this information environment.
The big ratings Trump brings means big profits, and that's a deal that may be too good for the U.S. media to pass up. Jim Spellman, CCTV, Washington.
Joining us now from Los Angeles, Cenk Uygur is host of The Young Turks, which bills itself as the largest online news show in the world. From Texas, Vincent Harris is a conservative media strategist who's developed digital strategies with Senators Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, among others. And also from California, Pamela Rutledge is a media psychologist and director of the Media Psychology Research Center. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Cenk, let me start with you. Right at the beginning of the show there, we heard President Obama joking about the fact, saying the press could be rightly proud of themselves for the role they played in the Trump candidacy. Maybe a joke, but seriously, how big a role did the media play in making Trump the nominee?
As some candidates in this race would say, huge. They played a gigantic role in it. They gave him about $2 billion in free media. And so I think that people underestimate, that are knee-deep in politics, how much name recognition makes a difference. So you have Donald Trump, who's a reality show star, and so he's been on TV forever, and even before that, he was a media star. So people go in and they see his name and they press that button. So the attention, whether it's positive or negative, is not nearly as important as the fact that it exists. So now, on the other hand, Bernie Sanders had almost no name recognition, and the media pretty much ignored him, and if they covered him at all, it was with great disdain. And he rose up past that anyway, which is an amazing feat. So there are two factors here. One is the media, but also a rising tide of populism that is helping both Trump and Sanders.
Right, and Pamela, if we look at the influence of, let's say, cable news television, we know that from figures that the people who watch cable news television are well into their 60s. So are we perhaps in some way overestimating the impact that cable news has on politics in this country?
Well, we may be overestimating the impact of cable news. You know, a few years ago, some research I did showed that the millennials were getting most of their political commentary from the Comedy Channel, which tells you something about their point of view about politics, and possibly appropriately for this election. But the other thing that happens is that psychologically, when people are familiar with something, it increases their liking no matter what the kind of content. So psychologically, there's this huge benefit, as we were just talking about, of this kind of familiarity. In a world of social media, the news are getting their leads from the populace as much as the populace are getting their lead from the media.
Right, Vincent, you know, we hear a lot of, I guess, misinformation about the role the media played. I was looking at an article that was written in the Washington Post, written by one of their political correspondents, Chris Cillizza, and he says one of the most frequent complaints I hear is, when people find out that he's a political reporter, is that the media doesn't fact-check Donald Trump. And he says that's not true. In fact, Donald Trump has been fact-checked more than anybody else. So is there a bit of misinformation here, perhaps a misperception of what the media is doing?
Yeah, and I would certainly agree with Chris's comments, but let me go back to what was mentioned earlier. Republican primary voters don't just go in and check boxes. Donald Trump won this Republican primary because of the issues that he ran on. And Donald Trump won this Republican primary because he was the candidate that was speaking most to the grassroots Republican base. Now, he managed to generate $2 or $3 billion in free press attention because of his controversial statements and because of his celebrity. But it's not just the traditional media that Donald Trump has been owning. It's social media. With 8 million followers on Twitter, Donald Trump has a larger following on Twitter than almost every cable news show in the country. So he's certainly been fact-checked. If you look at the debate a few debates ago with Marco Rubio, where Marco Rubio was attacking him about Trump University, there was rounds and rounds of media attention on what happened with Trump University. There's been rounds and rounds of media attention on his controversial comments about Muslims. There's been rounds and rounds about his comments about the border. So I think it's unfair to say that Donald Trump hasn't been drugged through the ringer by the media. He just does a great job, as he says in his book, The Art of the Deal, of talking in truthful hyperbole. That's exactly what he's been doing this entire campaign, which is as soon as another candidate seems to be getting attention, he just says something controversial and all of a sudden gets the media attention back onto him.
Right, he's done that very skillfully.
Can I jump in and
Jen,
agree and disagree here? So, first of all, I actually talked to Senator Rand Paul, who I think you used to work for, Vincent, and he had a great line. He said, Donald Trump does truth-telling without the truth. So it sounds like it's truth-telling because he's not talking like a regular politician and he's not studied and polished like Marco Rubio, so it has the veneer of truth without actually being true. And so I don't want to discount what you're saying. I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying in terms of his message. This populist message is working, and it's actually disproving what the conservative establishment is saying in America for all this time. They say the Republican voters want free trade deals. No, they don't. That they're in support of the big banks and the rich. No, they're not. And so here's Donald Trump ripping all that apart and actually running a populist campaign. And yeah, of course it's working, right? And that's because he's not beholden to the donors. The Republican establishment fed you all those lies for all those years because they work for their donors. So when you got a guy who's detached from the donors, it turns out he does really well. Again, same for Sanders. But don't discount how much that free media helps him, because people are not paying attention to the nitty-gritty. They don't know anything about his tax proposals or what he's going to do with Social Security. And when others criticize him for attacking Muslims or Mexicans, honestly, a lot of Republican voters look at that and go, yeah, that's my kind of truth-telling.
Okay, Pamela, go ahead.
Right, let me jump in too and add that this is not an election about facts. This is an election 100% about emotion, and he's speaking to the fear that people have about being left behind. So no matter who wins this election, there's going to be a huge population of people out there that feel disenfranchised by current policy, by the way the country's going, and they're not going away. So we haven't been talking about that, and we need to figure that part out.
Right, Vincent, and getting back to your earlier point that Donald Trump addresses those issues that resonate with grassroots voters, the question is, does the media ask the right kinds of questions of a person like Donald Trump? And more importantly, do they demand answers from him?
So I do think that the media is asking a lot of those questions, and I think that his Republican opponents ask a lot of those questions in the debates. I worked for Senator Rand Paul for 20 months or so, and he asked a lot of those questions of Donald Trump. Previously to working for Senator Paul, I worked for Senator Cruz for 3 years. I know Ted Cruz has asked a lot of those questions. So those questions have been asked in debates. And I think the media continue to ask a lot of the questions to Donald Trump about where he used to be on positions compared to where he is today. Those questions were also asked in hundreds of millions of dollars in paid advertising that were run in these past primary states against Donald Trump. And guess what? His earned media and his controversial statements certainly overcame all of the paid media against him, because as a grassroots conservative myself, I can tell you, you can spend as much money as you want on somebody, but if we think that they're authentic, if we think that they're telling us the truth, then we believe them. And that's something that Donald Trump has done a wonderful job of. And using social media, he's also gone around a lot of traditional media conversations and talked directly to voters, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook, where he has millions of people too. Now look, I worked for Rand Paul. I worked for Ted Cruz. I didn't want Donald Trump to be our nominee. Now he's our nominee, and certainly the media has done a wonderful job of making him the nominee, where we could barely get any attention for most of what Senator Paul was saying. Again, every time some other candidate tried to say something, Donald Trump would just say something incredibly controversial. But let's not say that Republican primary voters aren't still looking at the issues. They picked Donald Trump because they felt he was strongest on border security, and they picked him because they felt like he would keep our country safe. And they picked him because they felt like he would actually shake up Washington.
Cenk, if the media had done its job, then we would have answers to such things as what Donald Trump would do about Social Security, what he would do about immigration, what he would do about ISIS, what he would do about Russia. Do we have those answers?
No, we don't. But really, I do a lot of media criticism, and I think the media is, their bias is mainly pro-establishment. And so that works against candidates like Bernie Sanders, for example. But in the case of Donald Trump, I actually think that they did ask him a lot of questions, but he just wouldn't answer them. And the Republican voters didn't mind that he didn't answer them. He would constantly switch his positions, give enormously vague answers. I mean, his favorite answer is, everybody else is a mess. They're not winning anymore, and I'm going to win, and I'm going to do many, many great things. I mean, what are you going to do with an answer like that? They did follow-up after follow-up, but he refused to give an answer, and Republican voters were like, fantastic, here's a guy who talks like me and hates the same kind of people I hate. And by the way, but Vincent is right, and Dr. Rutledge is right, we feel isolated and we feel scared about our economic situation, and here's a guy who touts himself as a successful businessman, and maybe he'll fix that. Maybe he's our last hope. So I understand that. But I should add, by the way, if the media really wanted to press Trump, for them to keep pointing out that he doesn't like these groups only helped them. It didn't hurt him with Republican voters. What they should have pressed on was what a failure he is as a businessman. He went bankrupt 4 different times. That's what they didn't ask enough about.
Pamela, how did this bias, as Cenk put it, for the establishment help the establishment candidates like Hillary Clinton and work against candidates like Bernie Sanders?
Well, it makes the media emphasize certain stories, but I think the media really responds, as the other folks have been saying, to what gets attention, because that's really the business model, and you can argue for or against that business model, and the other option is you let somebody else pick all the stuff you're supposed to see. But it is about what people care about. So fundamentally, this is reflecting what people want to hear. And as you say, Donald Trump doesn't have to give answers because people want to know that somebody's going to protect them. That's what they care about. When you're afraid, you don't make good decisions. You don't care about the facts. You just want somebody to say, I got your back.
Welcome back. We're talking about the role of news and media in U.S. politics. Is the presidency lost and won over the airwaves? Still with me, Cenk Uygur is host of The Young Turks. Vincent Harris is a conservative media strategist, and Pamela Rutledge is a media psychologist. Welcome to all of you again. Vincent, let me get to you. I want to get to something that both Pamela and Cenk talked about just a moment ago, and that is the role of the media. You know, Leslie Moonves, the CBS CEO, said, talking about the Trump phenomenon, he said, "I've never seen anything like this, and this is going to be a very good year for us. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to say, but bring it on, Donald. Keep going. Donald's place in this election is a good thing. There's lots of money in the marketplace." Isn't that what it's all about?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a reason that the media is called the fourth branch of government. It's because it's so powerful to the electorate. The media helps shape voters' opinions. And certainly looking this cycle at Fox News, for example, which is the news source that most conservatives look to for information and find out who they should be supporting, Fox News has been criticized by all of Donald Trump's opponents in this primary for being too pro-Trump. If you look at after debates, they always went to Donald Trump first for interviews. If you look at their coverage, a lot of it was very pro-Trump. So certainly a lot of this is the media wanting to get headlines and clicks from Donald Trump. He has garnered them the highest debate ratings in history, which is all because everyone was sitting on their couches wanting to see the drama of the Republican debates. But even Fox News has been criticized, and perhaps rightfully so.
Cenk, you and your organization, the Young Turks, would be a great case study in this. I mean, here we have the mainstream media, and, you know, we may kid ourselves that with these, you know, looking at the philosophical role of the media, it being the fourth estate, it being the final arbiter, the final check and balance, etc. But do we kid ourselves that that is the case? I mean, do we kid ourselves that they are there to inform the public, or are they there to make money? I mean, you take the Young Turks, you've created a completely new organization which is doing something else.
Right, right. So the idea that the corporate media is there to be a watchdog of the government is hilarious. They're honestly a sophisticated form of Pravda. At least Pravda, you knew that it was state-run government. With the establishment media we have in America today, they, in essence, do the same job, but they're far more deceptive about who they work for. So let me be clear on why I say that. So, for example, when's the last time you heard on CNN the Pentagon is lying? Now, does anyone across the world believe that the Pentagon never lies? That's a hilarious comment. No one believes that, right? But the CNN never points that out. When's the last time they said the government is lying? They're not a watchdog of the government. They're an extension. They're an arm of the government. And the people working there don't realize that. If you tell them that, they're outraged. They're like, no, there's no conspiracy. Nobody ever told me to do that. But the Aaron Burnett's and the Wolf Blitzers of the world were selected and promoted specifically because they don't rock the boat. They don't challenge the establishment. They go for the status quo. So what does that lead to? That leads to, if you've got a debate between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders is asked questions like, why are you going to punish the rich? Aren't you going to raise taxes too much? Aren't you a socialist like Fidel Castro? Very aggressive, very slanted questions. And with Hillary Clinton, in my estimation, and it's not just my estimation, we proved it out on the Young Turks. We showed video after video, question after question, that were softballs to Hillary Clinton by comparison, let alone the Republicans. So that's how the media skews it in favor of the establishment. Now, there is a better way to do it, we think, and at the Young Turks, a lot of our revenue is based on the audience giving us $10 a month. tytnetwork.com/join if you'd like to join. But understand why that's so important, okay? It's because it gives us a financial incentive to serve the audience rather than to serve the government or serve advertisers or a corporate parent. Comcast and Time Warner are among the top 10 donors to Hillary Clinton. You think that doesn't affect them? Of course it does.
Pamela, Cenk raises it.
Wait,
I think
you're,
those are ridiculous.
You're arguing.
Okay, one moment. Vincent, I'll get to you. Pamela, go ahead.
Sorry. No, you're arguing that the audience is driving you, but the audience is driving the other networks as well, because people are tuning in to see what they want to see. So I think that argument, while maybe makes you revenues, is exactly specious. I mean,
no, that's actually not true at all, and I can explain. So yes, they are obsessed with the ratings that Donald Trump is giving them, but actually Bernie Sanders does terrific in online. For us and for many other outlets, he actually does better. And I've read articles where they explain, yes, Bernie Sanders does better for traffic, for ratings than Donald Trump does, but yet he gets very little coverage. Listen, you have to understand that for Comcast, MSNBC is not a big deal. It's a tiny amount of their giant media empire. What's a huge deal for Comcast is whether their merger with Time Warner gets approved. That's a multi-billion-dollar decision. Net neutrality, multi-billion-dollar decision. So the whole point is protect the establishment. So even if Sanders does well, he is a threat to the establishment. Don't cover him and treat him with great disdain.
Okay.
That matters a lot more to those corporate powers.
All right, Vincent, your turn.
Look, I love the alternative media. I love digital media, shows like The Young Turks, websites like Breitbart.com. But at the end of the day, the media, the mainstream media, traditional media, is still a watchdog. Now, perhaps you're correct that channels like CNN aren't as much of a watchdog on the establishment, but I would definitely argue that MSNBC and Rachel Maddow are great watchdogs on my party, and that Fox News and Bill O'Reilly is a great watchdog on the Democrats. So there's certainly watchdogging going on here. It just might not be the exact people that you wish were being watchdogged.
No. If I can jump in real quick. So, yes, Fox News is an exception. The reason is they're not run by a corporate CEO. They're still run by their founder, Rupert Murdoch. And so he can do whatever he wants, and he gives them carte blanche to be as conservative, right-wing, pro-Republican as they want, which I have no problem with as long as they were honest with their perspective. MSNBC, on the other hand, will only attack certain Republicans, but they will not attack Democrats, and they will not attack the government. So, yes, they will target someone like Chris Christie, but it's more of an exception that proves the rule. Otherwise, they're not progressives. They're just part of the Democratic wing of the establishment.
Pamela, we're talking to an international audience here. Just one thing. Aren't there supposed to be regulatory mechanisms in place in the United States that prevent the kind of bias in the media that we're talking about, that make sure that everyone gets a fair shot?
Well, I don't I don't think there are those kind of regulatory balances. I think that they count on, in some senses, they count on the sort of the profit motive to create balance. But with the proliferation of media, I think we've seen that so much segmentation that people can really choose the media that they want to receive and that they want to hear. And so that's become a problem as much as whether the bias, and people recognize bias on various channels. But there is no regulatory mechanism, and it would be impossible given social media to impose any kind of regulatory mechanism on bias.
And Cenk, I just want to get back to something else. We were talking right at the beginning of the show what President Obama had to say, saying that, the press could be proud of themselves for what they've done. But really, does President Obama have any credibility in criticizing the media? I mean, as has been pointed out to us, his administration has used the Espionage Act against whistleblowers who leaked to the media, and he's done so more than all the previous presidents put together.
That's absolutely right. No, President Obama has no credibility whatsoever on this. First of all, the press helped President Obama tremendously in 2008 and 2012. Even though Bernie Sanders got bigger crowds, bigger funding, more votes, they covered Obama 1,000 times more than they covered Bernie Sanders because they had a sense this guy is not going to rock the boat. He's taking the same kind of corporate donations. And it's funny, like people view it as like a conspiracy theory that the corporate media is actually owned by corporate parents. No, that's a fact. Of course they're owned by giant corporations, and of course the bottom line interests of those corporations matter a lot, and they knew that Obama would be perfectly fine, and he was. And then he turns around and he does the job he was elected for by the establishment, which is make sure there is no dissent. So if anyone's actually being a watchdog like Edward Snowden, chase him to the end of the earth. Use the whistleblower or fight against whistleblowers more than any other administration. He said he'd be the most transparent. He's actually the least transparent administration we've ever had.
Vincent, very soon in this election campaign, we're going to have two candidates, a two-horse race. Is media coverage going to get worse? It's going to get a lot rougher?
Well, by worse, if you're saying, will the media be looking at attacking more negatively Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? I think absolutely. Yeah. And I think that you're going to see both of the partisan media that we just discussed earlier. MSNBC is going to have some long knives out for Donald Trump, and Fox News has already, for the past 4 years, they've been having long knives out for Secretary Clinton. So, there's hour-long specials about Benghazi that run for the entire weekend, I feel like. So there's definitely some rough and tumble about to come, but the previously mentioned comment about social media, that's where I think this election is going to continue to be very different, because voters aren't just looking at traditional media anymore for their news and information. They are looking through Facebook, and they're looking at alternative media, and they're getting information from Twitter and Instagram and even Snapchat now. So I think a candidate like Donald Trump, with his sound bites and perfect, short, pithy commentary that he gives, that's made for the digital age. And really, I think that that's one other reason why he's done so well. He's not only played the traditional media like a fiddle, but he has also done a wonderful job of creating sound bites which are easily shared online.